Ever wonder how you can use JavaScript to interact with HTML elements on web pages? Wonder no more, because in today's lesson, we are going to be talking just about that. HTML DOM, also known as Document Object Model, is what allows JavaScript to be able to access any element on a web page, modify any element's content or attributes, add new or remove existing elements or its attributes dynamically, update CSS style definition of such elements, and finally, ability for JavaScript to be able to respond to so many numerous user events such as clicks, key down, key press, and many more. Welcome to JavaScript HTML DOM class. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do now is the ability for us to access any element on the web page. Now let's start off by designing or writing our first page that we're going to be using for our demo. We're just going to create a static template. So the next thing for us to do here now is for us to add our JavaScript, and I'm going to do it this way. We have our src, and the reason why I'm adding our JavaScript at the end part of the page is because for JavaScript to work properly, you need to have your document already loaded to the DOM already. So this is how it works. For you to write JavaScript, make sure your script is at the bottom of the page. Everything needed to be loaded before you can then start writing your code, especially if your JavaScript depends on what is on the page. There are some scripts you might want to write that doesn't have anything to do with the page, maybe do some calculation, you can put it at the top. But if you must depend on the fact that you want to get content from the body of your page, you then need to put your script at the later part of your page. So we're going to be calling app.js. I want to also make sure that we are writing all your scripts outside your page to make it neat and for us to be able to differentiate between our HTML page, our script page, and what have you. In fact, let me go ahead and style our CSS so that I'll make it as clean as possible. Okay, now that our files are ready to go, what we want to demonstrate to you is to show you how to access this paragraph here. So we have this paragraph here. How do you use JavaScript to access this element? And the way to do that is by using a DOM API. The document is the web page you are dealing with, and then followed by a period that allows you to access all the methods available. And the method we are particular about that will allow you to pick an element is called getElementById. At this point, there are quite a lot of methods that the document allows you to do. Remember, what the DOM is all about is like an API that allows you to manipulate or interact with the HTML pages. So we are starting gradually. There's a lot that you guys are going to be seeing. But first of all, we need a document to be able to get all the methods that are available on the HTML page. So this is me calling the document and then putting the period for me to see all the methods I have. The method I want to make use of now is getElementById. We could actually get elements by quite a number of things, but currently we are using by ID. In fact, I could decide that I want to get getElementByTagName. So you have quite a lot of options that you can pick for. You can also get elements by class, but the one that is very easy and very popular is by using ID. Remember what ID is all about when we were doing CSS. We talked about what ID was used for. We use ID to target a particular section. And I mentioned to you that ID is a way to uniquely identify an element in the entire page. No element can have the same ID. And this is such a way that you can specifically target it and do stuff with it. In this case now, we want to target this particular element, and then you then give it a name. So let's give it a name called demo. It means this demo is what we can use to access this element. Remember what we are trying to do? We are trying to get this element using JavaScript. You want JavaScript to be able to access that element. And what we've done now is to do documents.getElementById. Now, when you do this, the next thing, the document by ID allows you to put an argument. Remember, we've done function. So this is a member function of a document object. So this document is an object that has a method which is called getElementById, and the purpose of this getElementById is such that it's going to be able to get the elements on the HTML page that we want. And what's the name of the ID? It's called demo. I would like to console log all this thing here. That will tell you what you are up against, what you are going to see next. I don't want to do any magic yet. I just want to show you what will happen if we console log this and what it is that you have to be watching out for. I'm going to do console log. So we can't use our code runner here again because the code runner won't know how to deal with documents. So we have to go with our old preview. Look at what happened to our results. When you console log documents.getElements, this is what you have. It got the element for you as it is. What that means that you could actually target anything you want and you could get it. Now this is you targeting this particular item. You are targeting demo paragraph. You could target anything. You could target the whole body and get a whole lot of information from it. Now this is giving us an extra information. Apart from the fact that you've gotten the element itself, you have extra information telling you what are the properties that this paragraph has. Paragraph has quite a lot of properties which we cannot exhaust in this lesson. We cannot exhaust them. These properties are generic, but they cut across all elements. One of the parameters that is very important is the contents, which is called innerHTML. We are going to be focusing on inner text, innerHTML. So these two we are going to be big on it. Now that we've been able to get the element, what is the use of the fact that we can get the element? The use is that now that you have access to the element, you can manipulate it. So now that we have it, remember that we are doing JavaScript. So that means that we can actually write JavaScript stuff. I can hold this stuff in a variable. This can be kept in a variable for me to properly access it. So what that means is that I can say, let my P, which stands for my paragraph, is equal to all of this. That means P has the ability to then transverse all the functionality of what getElements can do. Then I can access the content of this paragraph by using innerHTML, which I say is one of those things I want us to look at. InnerHTML allows you to change the contents of any elements, majority of the elements. Any element that has content, you can change the contents by using innerHTML. So when you have it that way, you can then say we want to assign a value to the innerHTML. What value do you want to assign to it? Anything you want to assign to it, you can assign to it now. I can then say, hello, I'm changing the content. This is not what was defined before. This is JavaScript now. Look at the HTML. This is what you type on the HTML. Now, whatever is in the HTML does not matter anymore because guess what? JavaScript has control now. JavaScript is now making the calls on what happens because you have a code standby saying that what? Get the DOM, right? Get the demo paragraph and then assign what I have here to it, irrespective of what's going on. Just to show you that other things are still working the way they should work. Let's say we have a header here. Let's say we have header here, and this header is saying title page. So you can see that this header is not bothered because you're not programming the header. Your focus is not on the header. So as you make changes to it, you can see that the JavaScript is doing what it's designed to do. And what it's designed to do is to change the content of the paragraph. And that is what it's doing. So these are to get elements by ID. As I mentioned, there are also other ways you can get elements. You can get elements by name. You can get elements by class. You can get elements by attributes. So we're going to be, checking all that out as time goes on. One of the very important thing that makes getElementById interesting is because it's the only function that gives you the element based on the objects. The rest will give you array of objects. Of course, we've done array before, so those shouldn't be strange to you. Now let's get the header. This time around, we want to focus on documents.getElementByTagName, and we are focusing on H1. This will return collection of elements, more like array of elements. That's what it will return. So what that means is that obviously you can't access it directly. So let's console log it and see what it returns. So when you console log your H and you run this, you should see something like this. Now notice the return. Do you see that it comes in form of an array? And this is the reason why we did array and all that, so that when you are seeing all this, you will be able to access it. Notice that the length of what you have there is 1, meaning you have only one H1, which is correct. We only have one H1 on our HTML page. We can check this by adding other elements. So let's have another H1, and this time around we'll say first and second H1. So that shows you that you have HTML collection 2 H1s. So you can see that you now have them inside, and you can then check the value of each one. So if I want to make adjustment to the first h1, obviously I use the knowledge I have of array to say h1, and I want to access the first one. The first one is 0, and I want to change the value of the first one. I then use innerHTML. I then say my new value for h1 should be changing first h1. You can see how dynamic the whole thing is getting. You can see us writing JavaScript, but we're applying the change on an HTML page. This is me using getElementByTagName, get all h1s or all the tags that you put there. So most of the time you rarely use this. Ones that you use most of the time is getElementById. You have getElementByClassName. The same rule apply here by class name also applies. So let's now do getElementByClassName. So the class name we want to use is, let's say, change elements by class. That's what I want to call them our elements. So let's go back to our HTML and define some HTML tag that has class name with what we've specified here that we want to get. So we want to get anything that has change in it as its class name. We want to specify it and work on them. I just say change 2, meaning is the second div that I have there. So going back to our JavaScript, again, this one returns a collection of HTML elements, just the same way we were able to do for getElementByTagName. We also have the same thing here, getElementByClassName, but this time around, it also returned the same thing. So to prove that, we can do console log, and we have our item name. So let me just call it EL here. So we can have something like this. Do you see the result here? So it's telling you that the item that it has in its collection is an array of elements div.change. The second one is div.change, the same thing. That's how we're able to get it. Now that you have it, you can do what? You can manipulate it to your taste. And that's the idea. So you can see the two. As I highlight them, they also change on the view to show you that you're on any one of them. I'm going to show you two things. And the first thing is how to trigger an event that the user click on, because that's the major thing you get to do on the web. The user gets to interact with your page. What I'll show you now is how to interact with that. I'm going to create an interface. We're creating two buttons, on and off, and I want to create a light bulb. So how do we get a light bulb? So I just look for a light bulb online. Okay, so the code we wanted to run is just a simple code, and that code is to on and off the lights using the small knowledge that we have now. And we want to introduce some concepts, and that concept is how do we listen to events? How do we listen to what the user is clicking on the screen? The first thing you need to understand is be able to identify where the event is coming from. In this case, the event is coming from these two buttons. So what that means is that you need to be able to capture the event from these buttons using JavaScript. There are two methods in which you can use to capture this event. And we're going to start with a much more simpler one. We're going to use one event for one method, and we're going to use the second method using the second one. So the first method is to add an attribute to the button, and that attribute is called onClick. So we have these onClick events, like kind of an attribute that you can add to buttons. And what that does is that it calls a JavaScript functions, or you can write JavaScript inside that place, and then it executes what you need to do inside that part. So this is method 1. The method 2 is to actually give this guy an ID in such a way that you can use JavaScript to call it and add the function to it. So you add a function to it through JavaScript, but you need to be able to call it from JavaScript code. So we're going to call this guy off button. So that is the name, meaning from JavaScript, you can actually assign your code from JavaScript. So we're using two methods. The first method is to call a function that you must have written in JavaScript. The second method is to assign an ID here so that we'll call it in JavaScript. Let's add the code to on the bob for us. And remember what we want to do. It's very simple. It's a very simple code. Once you click this, we want JavaScript to be able to change the image here to on. Remember that we have the on picture. We have on and off. So, but we just want to be able to allow JavaScript to do it for us instead of us doing it manually, because we won't just be here all day long. The client is the one that will be able to interact with our page. So our page should be smart enough to be able to respond to what is going on. So let's go ahead and create a function, and the function we want to make work is called onBob. We've not created this function, by the way, but I'm writing it out so that is what we're going to call it when we get to the code. So I'm calling the function name called onBob. That's the name of the function. What then happens, you then go to your JavaScript environment and write a function to actually turn on the bob. And when I mean turn on the bob, is just to change the attributes of the image from off to on. That's programming for you. It's as easy as that. So you need to be able to define what you want, which is what we define in our interface, and then you think about what is going to help me to achieve what I want to do. In this case, you need this button, and what we've done is to put the onClick, and we'll create a function which we just labeled. We've not actually, that function does not exist yet. We'll go and create it right now. So let's go ahead and create that function. Function name is called onBob. By now, I'm sure we know how to create a function. So we'll write our function this way, and it's called onBob. It does not require any parameter, so we'll leave it like that. And the next thing for us to do is to actually switch on the bob. How do we get access to these elements here? That means we have to actually find a way to give it a name here so that we can call it when we need it. So I'm going to give it a name ID so that we can call it and change the source. So we're going to give it bob, like that. Since we've given it a name, that means we can actually have access to it using the document object model. So I can say let's my bob variable name now is equal to documents. This is now your new best friend, getElementById. So you'll be using this getElementById very well as we go on building this. So now that you've gotten this, you've been able to capture all of these elements in its own glory. You've gotten it inside this place. Now what do? How do you on the bob? To on the bob, we change the source. Another thing we need to mention is that all the attributes of an element is available to the element by using a dot notation. So what that means is that I could just simply do bob and do dots. So all the attributes that the element has, image has src attributes. So what that means is that that src attribute is available to me right now. I can just do src and I say is equal to. Anything I say equal to, it becomes what it is in real life. Let's try that and see. So we already know the name of the image. The image is on.png, and that should work. Of course, this function is not being called yet. How do we call this function? Is by clicking on this button. So what that means is if we click on this button, this light is going to come up. So let's give it a try. We click and then our light is on. How do we put it off? We can't put off our lights. So let's see how to put off our lights. And the second method is what we're going to use to put off our lights. The second method is obtaining the ID of the button, which is here. And before we go ahead using the second method, let me just use the first method so that I don't confuse you guys. Instead of onBob, I will then do offBob. I then need to go and write this function to off the bob. And how do I do that? I come here, I write exactly what I've written here, but in this case, I will change the onBob to offBob. And what else am I changing? I'm changing the on to off, such that when the user clicks on the off here on the HTML page, what is going to happen is going to call the off function, and the off function is here saying that the PNG should be off. Let's give it a try. We on, we off, we on, we off. This is working just the way we want it to be. So this is working very well. The other part I wanted to demo is how to off this without calling the function directly, or by using ID to call it. So I will say my ID is equal to off button. So this is the name, ID is equal to off button. So you can see that it's no more wired to this again. We've now written the code for this ID to be able to call the off button function. So we want to attach a click event to this ID without adding it here. We want to make it dynamic. We want to be able to come to the code and write that code here. So first of all, we need to get this element. We need to get the off element first. And how do we do that? Is by saying let the off button is equal to document.getElementById. And what is the name of the off button ID? The name is called off button. So we put it there. Now that we've done this, we now have access to this button, and we can do as we wish using JavaScript to tell it what we want it to do with that button. So what I want to do with this button, remember I said that you can actually access any property, any attribute of an element. Look at what this is. This is an attribute. onClick is an attribute of a button. So what that means is that JavaScript can actually access this onClick event. Same thing for this section. We can access the onClick event. Let's go ahead and give that a try. I come here, I do onClick, and then I have this. Oh, so what that means is that I can actually assign a ready-made function to this. I already have a function that can do off button. I can actually assign this to this, meaning it should go and run this. So if I try and do this now, it ons, it off, it ons, it off, is that you've been able to adjust the attributes of an element. src is an attribute of an image element. So we've been able to adjust that by using JavaScript. Our next example is how to create something that does not exist. So what we want to look at now is adding and removing elements. In fact, apart from the fact that you are adding it, you are even creating, because in the presence of adding, you are creating what does not exist. How do you do that? So we have this power button, and the idea of the button is to generate random number. So when we click generate random number, it's going to have it on the bottom, and it's going to create a div element continuously. That's what we want to do. And we can have another button that says delete. Let's work with creating random number first. And the idea is when we click on generate random number, it's going to generate it underneath here. That place where you want it to generate, you have to create a kind of a container so that when your item comes, it knows where it's going to sit. So we're creating a kind of container for it, and I can give it an ID. I said contents. So we'll have our content placement will be done here, so that when we are generating, we can target this part where our item can sit in there. For ease, I will just say onClick. For ease, onClick, we will now write a function when we can call it create new elements. This function does not exist. We're about to create it right now. So we'll go ahead and come here and generate our new function. And you know the idea of the function. What the function is supposed to do is to create new elements. The syntax for creating new element is what I want to show you guys now, and that is using also the document notation. So the document dot, the function or the method is called create elements. So this you need to know. If you need to create elements, this is the function that will help you do that under the DOM. So you do this and you use the tag name to specify the kind of elements you want to create. You might say you want to create a div tag, or you might say you want to create an h1 tag or a paragraph. As the case may be, you define what you want. So let's just use a div. So if you use a div there, what that does is that it creates that element there. But what are you creating it to? You have to assign it to something so that you can play with the variable. So we say let the element we're about to create now is equal to whatever we create here the new elements that we're creating, we're assigning it to EL, in such that we can then start programming what the content of the EL will look like. I can say the EL should have inner HTML. You know what inner HTML does? For now it's supposed to set the content. We now want to say the content of the inner HTML should be not random. I know I'm bringing in something new here. I just want to make it fun. So this is a way to generate a random number, and for now you won't need it. It's just to make things fun. I don't want to put a static content there, just to show that it's generating new number, or rather it's generating new things. That's why I have this here. We've not talked about the math class. This is a math object that allows you to do mathematical computation. So let's move on. Now that we've been able to generate it, what's the next thing? If we do this, it generates the number, but this element is not anywhere on the document. It's not on the DOM. We've not placed it on the page. How do you place it on the page? Remember this guy here. This guy is supposed to be how we attach it to the page, because originally this guy is already on the page by default, waiting for us to append our content that we generate there. And that is where we also need to use this one to accept the new content that we've created. So that means we need to hold the variable of the container. We need to create a variable container and get the documents, getElementById of the container. That's called the content. That's the name here. The content, we'll call it content here. So we need to get this and assign container to it in such a way that we can now use it to accept these new elements that we create. This new element has been created now, but we didn't do anything. We didn't add it to the page. Because this content is already in the page, we can then accept what we've done and add it to the page by using what we call append child. On this page alone, we've used just two functions. Create element is to create the element that does not exist before. It's not anywhere existing. Remember that the container is existing because it was defined in the HTML structure. This one is existing. So we use the one that is existing and add the one that is not existing inside it. So therefore, I can now do append child. What child am I appending? The one I just created, which is EL. So what that means is if I click on this button, I should see the results. So you can see the number generating, and if I do more, I keep getting more numbers. So this is how you can create new elements. If you console log the container, you can see that console logging the container, you can see the object is being created. The object is created, and you can manipulate this object as you wish. The next thing we want to do is to delete. So what I want to achieve now is to delete the last item that was in. So I'll come here and do delete last or something. So we can do delete last or delete first. So let's go ahead and also append a function to it and call it delete last. So because we have this in this format, I want to be able to call all these items that we'll create here by using getElementByClass. Notice that on creating the item, it's just a plain div. Look at the structure of what we have. And I want to get all these items here. To make it easy for you guys, I want to add a class name to this div I just created. And how do I do that? Of course, using JavaScript. We come here, and at the point whereby we specify inner HTML here, I also want to specify the class name. To specify the class name, we go to EL dot. If you say class, you will be wrong. You can set class property using just class. You have to use the word class name. Strange. So use class name is equal to. So for now, we will just use gen. We'll use gen. So what that means is that anytime you go ahead and generate, you will see that your new item will have the gen with it. So let me show you that again. So if we run this and you check, notice that your new generated numbers are having class automatically append with them. And this will make it easy for us to be able to get all elements that has gen with them, and then we can put them as a collection and do what we need to do with them. So this is a very neat way for you to collate all your generated contents in a way, and then you can easily look for them when you need them. So let's go ahead. Remember what we're about to do. We are supposed to delete last. So let's go ahead and do function delete last. Okay, so we have another selector, and that is called querySelector. That querySelector allows you to be able to select anything using the normal CSS query system. So the query system that you normally use for CSS. So just like we have this content here, you could actually say that you want to query the last item here. That's the gen, you want to query the last item. So we're going to use querySelector, and that is a new one. And that is, to use that, we can say let the item to delete. So we say item is equal to, we're also using our document model system, but instead of saying getElementById, we're going to use querySelector. And the purpose of querySelector is the fact that it allows you to be able to specify CSS kind of selection. So what we now want to include here is the fact that we want gen to be selected, and not just gen, we want the last child of gen. Anything that is the last child is what we want to focus on, because that's what the problem is. We want to delete the last child, we want to select it. Just for us to know that, just to show that it's working, we can do console log to log what the item is saying, and we should expect to be seeing the last item there. So let's generate some bunch of items and let's console log our results. So if we click on delete item, you can see that it's giving us the last item. So even if you use first child, remember what this is doing. This is using normal CSS querySelector. So if you say first child, is supposed to be picking the first item because you are using CSS selector. So this is more like using CSS selector, and the idea is what we want to do is to delete. In order to remove an item from the DOM, we just call remove, the remove function. Remember that the item, we've already console log it and we saw it's under item. Then to remove it, we'll call the item and you do dot remove. And once you do that, the item should go away. So let's try and check if we have everything in place. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if I click delete, we're expecting this last one to go. So you can see it went, delete last one, it went, delete last one, it went, like that until you are out of item to delete. You can do the same thing in reverse if you want to delete the first one. So this is just an example. We are going to do a robust to-do application. This idea is to get all the functions out there so that you guys can, be ready once you see all those functions in use, and you can understand how the function is being implemented. So remove is used to remove an item from a DOM entirely. You won't find it there, no existence, no evidence of the item being available. Then the next one was the fact that you can use querySelector, very important. And we're already used to creating elements and then appending elements. Your assignment is pretty simple. What you to do in your assignment is to start prepping for your to-do app that we're going to build. What I want you guys to do is to have this kind of interface where you have your text box and you have add button here in such a way that when you click add, whatever is inside here will be added inside a kind of a container. Yeah, so you can have something like this where this place can be ID and this is container. So this is, so you can have something like this. So whatever you put here, once you add the content, it should come here. Thank you for staying to the end. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and turn on bell notification in order to be notified when we release new videos. See you in the next one.